Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a high-stakes geopolitical drama unfolding in literally one of the most critical waterways on the planet, this Strait of Hormuz. We're going to break down this absolutely fascinating conflict over international waters, tolls, and global trade. It's a showdown whose implications could completely reshape alliances for decades to come.
Okay, let's dive right into this. $34 million. Just take a second to let that massive number sink in, because we aren't talking about the cost of some new piece of military hardware or, a giant diplomatic aid package. No, that jaw-dropping figure, that is the potential cost for a single ship just to transit the Strait of Hormuz.
Which, of course, leads us directly to the central mystery of our explainer today. How exactly did we arrive at a point where the United States is proposing to charge astronomical tolls in the Middle East? I mean, a fee that is actually 17 times higher than the one being demanded by its adversary, Iran? To understand this really incredible shift in policy, we have to rewind a bit and look at how this whole toll war actually started in the first place.
Section 1. The Strait's Toll Problem and Iran's $2 million crypto checkpoint.
So for months now, a massive point of tension has been Iran's insistence on controlling the Strait of Hormuz. When the conflict in the region kicked off, Iran actually started attacking ships in the main bed of the strait. Now you might be wondering, why do they do that? Well, it was to force them to navigate through a much narrower choke point, specifically between Iran's Kesh and Larak Islands. By funneling ships into this tight little space, Iran basically established a makeshift checkpoint, demanding a toll of roughly $2 million per ship. And get this, the fee is reportedly collected in cryptocurrency. This setup gave Iran a permanent form of leverage over the US and its Gulf allies, who, as we know, desperately rely on this strait to export their oil and gas. And why should this matter to you? Because choking off this single waterway directly impacts global energy markets. It literally drives up the prices you see at the pump and fuels everyday inflation.
The United States, predictably, strongly opposed this whole setup. And that wasn't just because of the economic leverage it gave Iran, but it was based on a strict interpretation of international law. This firm legal stance was really clearly articulated by U.S. Senator Marco Rubio. He stated, "These are an international waterway, no country is allowed to charge tolls or fees, that's existing international law." So the baseline U.S. position was crystal clear, right? International waterways are open to everyone and nobody gets to just set up a toll booth. But as you're going to see, maintaining that strict stance proved to be incredibly difficult. Which brings us to Section 2, the failed ceasefire agreement and the 60-day diplomatic fudge.
So, during negotiations, the U.S. obviously wanted things back to the pre-war status quo, meaning zero tolls. Iran, on the other hand, insisted their new system was here to stay. What they actually ended up agreeing upon was, well, highly fragile. Let's walk through the timeline. Day 1. They signed a 60-day ceasefire memorandum of understanding, or MOU, where Iran basically agreed to just pause the tolls. Day 30. The goal here was to return merchant ship movement to its pre-war volume, factoring in the time needed to remove mines and other technical obstacles. But then we hit day 61, and the fundamental disagreement over those tolls completely shatters the ceasefire. Because this MOU was inherently just a temporary pause, the real underlying dispute was basically just kicked down the road.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the absolutely absurd contrast in how both sides viewed this exact same document. The U.S., spearheaded by statements from Donald Trump, interpreted the MOU as a huge victory, claiming it secured a permanently toll-free opening of the strait. But over in Iran, their foreign minister was telling state media a completely different story. They claimed that the, quote, future management of the waterway would be different and that services would definitely no longer be free. So Iran essentially just agreed to stop calling them tolls and fully planned to rebrand the exact same system as service fees. It was just an entirely unsustainable fudge.
And sure enough, almost immediately after the MOU was signed, the arguing started right back up. Iran still wanted ships to go through their designated choke point, even if they weren't actively charging the toll at that very second. The U.S. countered this with a pretty clever tactical workaround, which we're calling the Omani loophole. Basically, they started encouraging merchant ships to hug the coastline of Oman right on the completely opposite side of the strait. So, the really crucial takeaway here is that because these ships were now traveling through Oman's territorial waters, Iran lacked any legal jurisdiction over them, effectively cutting off their ability to collect any future revenue.
But as you can imagine, this workaround put Oman in an incredibly tough spot. Historically, they've acted as a trustworthy intermediary between the U.S. and Iran. But now, they were under intense pressure from both sides. Iran pushed Oman to set up a joint toll system so they could share the profits. The U.S., meanwhile, made it crystal clear that any arrangement like that was completely unacceptable. In fact, Donald Trump issued a really stark warning regarding Oman's cooperation, stating flatly, It's international waters, and Oman will behave just like everybody else, so we'll have to blow them up. They understand that. So, with pressure mounting and that fundamental disagreement over control totally unresolved, the diplomatic fudge has collapsed entirely. The violence resumed. Iran actually hit 3 ships that were hugging that Omani coastline, literally the exact same ships the U.S. had redirected. After that, Iran declared the strait closed, making it very clear that anyone wanting to pass through would once again have to stop at their toll booths. The U.S. immediately responded by locking down the region with a total blockade on everything coming in and out of Iran's ports. Now, while the blockade itself was a pretty predictable response, what came next was a completely unexpected policy twist. And that brings us to the dramatic climax of our explainer.
Section 3. Trump's 20% gambit and the guardian angel toll.
Okay, out of nowhere, the U.S. announced that they, acting as the self-proclaimed guardians of the strait, would begin charging their own tolls, calculated at 20% of a ship's total cargo value. Let's move to this next part and see how this builds, because the math here is truly staggering. Step 1. An average supertanker carries about 2 million barrels of oil. Step 2. If we price that oil at, say, $85 a barrel, we hit Step 3. That gives a single supertanker a total cargo value of $170 million. Step 4. When you apply that newly proposed 20% U.S. toll to that cargo,
It results in a shocking $34 million fee per ship. This brilliantly illustrates the jaw-dropping contrast between the two sides. Look at this. On the left, we have Iran's illicit toll of $2 million per ship. On the right, the proposed U.S. toll of $34 million. It's wild. The U.S. was suddenly suggesting a toll 17 times more expensive than the very one they were fighting to dismantle just weeks prior.
So what exactly is the philosophy behind this massive policy pivot? Well, for the Trump administration, it stems from a long-standing view that the U.S. Navy effectively operates as a guardian angel for the Middle East, guaranteeing freedom of navigation. And because of that, they feel they deserve a reimbursement for past, present, and future costs. When asked about it, Trump's response was surprisingly simple and highly transactional. He said, "Why shouldn't we? We're the winner. We won. We have a concept where we'll charge tolls." It's just a fascinating shift in traditional foreign policy norms, essentially treating international security as a service rendered. But what actually happens when a superpower starts treating its military protection like a toll road? Let's zoom out from the localized math for a second and objectively analyze the potential long-term fallout.
that brings us to our final section, the long-term geopolitical backfire and shifting global alliances. Look, implementing a policy that essentially squeezes your traditional Gulf allies for cash might generate some serious revenue in the immediate short term. But the long-term domino effect here, it is incredibly risky. Think about it. Treating your allies like customers inevitably incentivizes those same allies to reduce their dependence on you wherever they possibly can. It pushes these nations to urgently find, or honestly even physically create, alternative shipping routes just to bypass the strait entirely. And perhaps most importantly, it actively drives traditional U.S. allies to go looking for new potential security guarantors who aren't going to charge them $34 million a pop for a single ship. The biggest alternative out there, China. And hey, this isn't just some abstract geopolitical problem happening thousands of miles away. If these shipping routes fundamentally change, or if global alliances shift, it directly destabilizes global markets, impacting the flow of everyday consumer goods all the way to your front door.
Which leaves us with a really critical question to end on. Will a short-term, highly transactional approach to foreign policy permanently alter our global security architecture? By demanding massive tolls for military protection, is the U.S. inadvertently rolling out the red carpet for China in the Middle East? It's a massive, high-stakes geopolitical gamble, and for sure the consequences are going to ripple across the entire globe. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer today, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.